Here's a question from a man named David in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. David, I have been to Australia several times, and Brisbane is one of my favorite cities. So, I am honored to be able to respond to your question. Can you please explain about generational altars? When you ask them to see Jesus Christ for forgiveness, does that ancestor get saved? Now, some of you may not know what David is asking about, so let me explain the context of this question. One of the teachings about this ministry that is quite different from most people involved in deliverance, and certainly not something that historically with inner healing and deliverance ministries has had much interest or attention, is this concept of generational identities, or as we call them, generational alter ego states, or generational altars. So let me just explain to you briefly how this happens. Now, we have a teaching DVD on this subject, and our International School of Exorcism, which I pray you'll enroll in, has some courses that teach this in detail because it's a very crucial element in getting people free from curses and demons. And without this, sometimes you're simply not able to get the individual free. So, study our books at our school on what we teach in terms of dissociation or dissociative identity disorder, or used to be called multiple personalities, and understand that in this life, an individual can have a psychological fragment of consciousness. They can, because of trauma, for example, develop another internal identity. That's called a multiple personality, or a dissociative identity personality. And that particular aspect of consciousness, or that particular fragment of the soul, has its own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, likes and dislikes, and so on. It's a separate identity within the mind and soul of the core person. Now let's suppose that an ancestor did something terrible. Let's suppose they murdered somebody. And through that trauma, through the hate and the anger and everything associated with it, they, in their mind, had a split, a dissociated identity form. And that piece of the soul of that person associated with that terrible deed was a separate, disparate aspect of consciousness. Now, my latest book, Dealing with Demons, talks about the psychological and the behavioral inherited characteristics that neuroscience is now studying. For example, I deal at length with the topic of epigenetics and how this branch of science is discovering the ways in which behavioral tendencies are genetically imprinted. So, going back to my case of a moment ago, if this ancestor committed this evil deed, if a part of them associated with that evil was a fragmented state of consciousness, now not the whole individual, not the actual individual, but a fragmented state of consciousness in terms of behavior, could be imprinted genetically, could be right there in the DNA, it passes on generation to generation, so that if it's evil and it's a doorway for demons, sometimes, if that particular phenomenon is present, I'm able to speak to that identity from the past just the way I speak to a dissociated identity or a multiple personality in the present. And so do psychiatrists and psychologists. It's a separate state of consciousness. In this case, it's just a generational state of consciousness, or as we call it, ancestral generational dissociation. So what we seek to do is resolve the moral and the spiritual and the demonic conflict that is in the mind of that fragmented piece of consciousness. And so we may lead it to the Lord, lead it to a state of repentance, and send it to Christ. Now keep in mind, it's not the individual. The individual's life is over. They're dead. But it's this fragment of consciousness that needs resolution in the mind of the current descendant who is tormented, because that fragment of consciousness and its connected evil is a source of demonization. So a door to demons has been opened by that fragmented state of consciousness which has been inherited. So what we're doing is psychologically saving or resolving or bringing to a state of resolution that piece of consciousness. We are not saving the soul of the departed. We are not going into time to regenerate that individual. But because part of that individual is connected with evil and may be a doorway to demons, the demons we discover cannot be expelled until that fragment of consciousness from the past is resolved and it comes to a state of peace with Jesus Christ. I realize this is a short explanation for a very complex psychological and spiritual phenomenon, so please read our books. Read our book on curse breaking, which talks about this. Read our book on Jezebel, which discusses it, and also our book on dealing with demons. And above all, enroll in that school of exorcism so you can study the courses where we explain all of this in detail so that you can receive the help you need and you can help others as well. The most frequent demon that I deal with is the spirit of Jezebel, the most prevalent evil spirit of our age. This demon wants to destroy your health, your finances, your marriage, your family, and your church. Learn the tactics of Jezebel throughout history and in the time in which we live. My book, Jezebel, Defeating Your Number One Spiritual Enemy, is your key to overcoming this demon, which is more prevalent than at any time in human history. Get your copy today. Jezebel, Defeating Your Number One Spiritual Enemy.
He took the curses away from me. Was he Bob Larson? Because he can help you.
If your life isn't all that it should be, if relationships aren't working, if your health, your finances, or your spiritual life are unhappy, schedule a personal one-on-one encounter with me. We'll get to the root of the issues that are holding you back. We'll give you answers and a whole new direction in life.
Oh, what a change, what a difference when you have an encounter with God.
Take action. I look forward to seeing you soon.
We encourage your support for this worldwide outreach to do what Jesus did. For the latest information on resources, seminars, conferences, training institutes, retreats, and international missions, go to boblarson.org. Thank you for your prayers and financial partnership.